Student loans have become a significant burden on many Americans' financial well-being. However, having student loans doesn't mean you need to put your personal and financial goals on hold. In today's episode of Financial Fortitude, we delve into the current state of student loans and share strategies that have provided relief to others, helping you stay on track to becoming an extraordinary wealth builder. Make sure you stick around until the end, where we provide an update on the new Saving on a Valuable Education SAVE repayment plan.
Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in. Michael, thank you for joining me here today. I know that you are extremely passionate about this area of financial planning, so I am excited to dive into our topic today and super pumped to share as much valuable information as we both can to all of our listeners.
This is a touchy subject, right? I would venture to say that most individuals are dealing with some form of student loan debt, right? That ball and chain, that burden, if you will. And some come into it already knowing what to expect just based on family upbringing and cultures. Others have no idea what they're getting themselves into, especially if they're first generation immigrant or the first one in their family to actually go obtain a higher education, go off to college and get a 4-year degree. There's also some misconceptions of where the bulk of this debt is actually coming from, meaning is it coming from undergraduate degrees or is it coming from graduate? So I'm super excited to get into the weeds with this. This, like you said, is something that I'm very passionate about, that I have a bunch of conviction behind, which is why I wanted to go and get my certified student loan professional designation to begin with, because there was just a lot of bad advice that was being provided out there, is what I started to identify. So, instead of being a part of the problem, you got to be a part of the solution. So that's why I'm here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's chat about the landscape a little bit, because I think the biggest challenge from a student loan planning perspective is more so just in the infancy of what student loans look like, right? 20, 30, 40 plus years ago, a lot of our parents or people in that older generation, student loans were never even a consideration. Right now, college costs have ballooned so much that it's almost impossible to have the money set aside to pay for a 4-year degree, let alone a postgraduate degree thereafter. So I think the biggest challenge that we often see, and I mean, Michael, I'm sure you can comment on this too, is that the landscape is just so new. And a lot of the advice being offered by experienced advisors that assist with student loan planning is just few and far between as a whole.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the CSLP designation is something that's come to the scene probably within the last decade, maybe decade and a half, and it's becoming more and more prominent because, like myself, years ago, folks are starting to identify, especially in the financial services industry, that, hey, this is something that's coming up more and more and more in those initial first dates with our clients. So how do we address this? We can either continue to treat it like a traditional debt, which it's not, right? It's not a credit card debt balance. It's not a mortgage. It's not a car loan, especially when it's a federal loan. So we can't treat it in that manner.
For many people, it feels like it, though.
Correct.
Right? Or at least that's the expectation or the experience that we see. Is like, hey, there's this huge problem that I have. It's a student loan. And
right. And we're not going to say any names, but there's a ton of talking heads in the media that will tell you, hey, live on rice and beans, have a minimalist lifestyle for like the first 2.5 decades of your life. That's a little extreme, but throw everything in the kitchen sink at your debt and put all of your aspirations and your desires to the side because you don't deserve to have them because you chose to take out this debt. And I'm here today to tell you that that's not true. You can overcome that. And the strategies that we've been implementing have been able to provide relief for the clients that we engage with and having real meaningful impacts and changes in their life. I'm talking about tears in their eyes based on the outcome because of the great work that we're able to do surgically for their student loans. So just to provide a little bit of landscape and backdrop, to reference data provided by the Education Data Initiative on student loan debt statistics, currently, as of July 2024, there's about $1.753 trillion in outstanding student loan debt.
That's a T, people.
Trillion
That's
with
a
a
T,
right? And this has just continued to increase and balloon year over year. You mentioned earlier that it's close to impossible to adequately prepare for higher education for your children. And that's just one child, let alone if you have multiple, right? Like I'm about to have my 4th child. So I'm just thinking about how am I going to help in this arena for my children? But at the same token, we also have to recognize that if you can become an extraordinary wealth builder, there is an opportunity for you to be proactively prepared to give your children an opportunity that maybe you didn't have, right? But again, there's nothing wrong with taking out debt. Some of the wealthiest people in the world love to leverage debt as a means to be able to propel themselves forward. So it's just a matter of how you view it and how you utilize it, which is really the important component of it. Now, 2023 was also the first year that outstanding student loan debt actually decreased. And this is primarily due to a couple factors, mainly being the amount of forgiveness that has been awarded by the current administration and the education department for the last 3 years. Okay, so I want to say it decreased by about 1.22%, somewhere in that range. Now, of that 1.753 trillion, 1.62 trillion, roughly 91.2% is federal as opposed to private. Now, that makes me smile, right? And you might be like, Michael, why are you smiling about 1.6 trillion in federal student loan debt? I mean, this guy's bonkers. No, the reason why I smile about that is because there are so many benefits that borrowers get for being a federal borrower as opposed to a private borrower. Okay.
Let's dig into that. Let's give some landscape for those who either have one of the two student loans, those who are considering taking a student loan, or those who are like, hey, I have no idea what I have and how they work. What's that landscape look like, the difference between the two?
Yeah, so with federal student loans, if the borrower were to become totally disabled based on the definition set forth by the Social Security Department, it's a pretty stringent definition, but if they were to become disabled, they would have their loans discharged. No taxable event would occur with that. If the borrower were to pass away untimely, the student loans would become discharged, which is pretty powerful, right? These things go away. Doesn't fall into the lap of a spouse or anyone else. If the borrower falls into financial hardship, they can put the loans into a financial hardship forbearance to where they're not required to make payments. Interest will continue to accrue in most instances, but it doesn't negatively affect the borrower's credit score. Borrowers also have the opportunity to seek forms of forgiveness, and there's a couple forms of forgiveness, but the most prominent one is going to be public service loan forgiveness, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But one that kind of gets forgotten is time-based forgiveness, and it's often overlooked. And so when I'm able to insert that into a conversation and provide the details of how it actually works and could benefit the borrower, it's life-changing. So I'm excited to share on that today. And then the final piece that I think is most beneficial is going to be the fact that you can manipulate your payment based on your income, right? And this is where we as financial professionals can become very, very surgical with the advice that we're providing the borrower, because we're working hand in hand with a trusted CPA or accountant to say, hey, let's manage your adjusted gross income, because that's what your student loan payment is going to be based off of. How can we not only make decisions and move pieces around on your balance sheet that will improve the quality of your student loan repayment strategy?
So why the heck, essentially, would anyone consider a private loan then? Because there's certainly a significant amount of clients that come across at least or come through our doors that do have private loans, and they're not always sure why they have them. So why?
When it comes to at least undergraduate, there's a cap on how much a undergraduate borrower can receive each year for those 4 years between a subsidized and an unsubsidized loan. Okay. A lot of that is going to be based on the FAFSA application, right? Financial aid. And if the parents of that student make too much money, then it's going to reduce the amount of potential financial aid that they'll receive, which is a conversation for a different day. We can get very into the weeds on that.
A whole other podcast topic is the FAFSA form, right?
Exactly. And it's been in the headlines because they've just kind of blown it up and created a lot of unnecessary issues with the modifications and changes that they've been making. But if you qualify for less federal aid, but you still have a shortfall between what's due for the cost of tuition, then the only other avenue is to go get a private loan. Now, there are benefits to private loans in comparison to federal loans, one being that the interest rates are typically more attractive. My belief and philosophy, though, is that interest rates are only relevant if you stick to the amortization schedule, meaning that if I promise to pay something back over 10 years, that interest rate really becomes important because they're going to collect all 10 years worth of interest. Now, if I accelerate my payoff and pay it off in 5 years, well, then they're not going to get all the interest that they otherwise thought they were going to, because I'm not paying it for 10 years, I'm paying it for 5. So I try not to let the interest rate tail wag the dog when making decisions around the student loans. Most private lenders do not discharge loans upon death or disability. There are a handful out there that do, and more are starting to change their promissory notes or their contracts to benefit the borrowers to some extent, because they have to become more competitive with federal loans, especially as we remain in this higher interest rate environment.
Yep. I know what at least my experience has been, but on your end, when you see a young professional walk through your door to have a meeting with you, how many of them are carrying some form of student loans? Just ballpark.
Yeah, I would say if I'm meeting with 10 individuals in a week, that it's over 50%. It's probably closer to 60 to 70%. And that's just because of how society has shifted from a professionalism standpoint. If we look at a recent study that was conducted on statistia.com, and this is looking at individuals aged 25 or older that have graduated from college or another higher education institution. As of 2022, about 37.5% of the population had some sort of higher education degree from a four-year university or college. Okay. If we go back to the 1940s, it was 4.6% of the population. Now, just think about what happened over history, right? With just advancements in technology and mass production and, going from working on the farm to working in cities and textile mills and everything else like that. So there has been a shift in professionalism to where a higher education degree, a four-year degree, is almost required to get a seat at the table, right?
Yep.
Now, to take it even beyond that, because so many folks are getting college degrees today, now you have to be even more marketable and differentiate yourself further. So what do you think that's causing these young professionals to do?
Specialization, further education, more degrees, i.e. more student loans.
Right. They're going to get a graduate degree, right? Or they're doing something from a specialization perspective so that they can level themselves up and get a potential multiple in income as an entry-level role. And to your point, they're taking out more debt. Now, the difference between undergraduate loans from a federal perspective and graduate loans is that there's a cap on undergraduate loans, right? The max that you could be awarded over the course of 4 years. With graduate loans, there's really no cap. It's kind of the wild, wild west in my mind, because they're going to give you the federal loans that you need as a graduate. Again, you're not going to have any income, so it's going to be very attractive for them to give you more loans because you're going to qualify for higher. So you're going to get loans for not only the cost of the tuition and the education, but also your lifestyle, right? This is where the graduate plus loan comes in, because you have to live. And as a 23, 24, 25, 26-year-old, you may not be primed and ready to make sound financial decisions. So when you're covering your cost of living, you might be incorporating entertainment. You might be incorporating travel.
Drinks out on a Friday night, right. Spring break trips, right?
Well,
anything.
And to be fair, if you're getting a specialized degree, you're probably not going to have as much downtime to do all that stuff. But when you do have downtime, you're probably taking advantage of it. And you think, hey, I deserve to be able to go do this because of the hard work that I'm doing. And to an extent you do, but you also have to understand that you're financing your lifestyle at that point for the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And so is it really worth it at that point?
Yeah. So here's what I'm hearing, and this is what has me super excited, is when I hear things from you, and I would tend to share the same experience, probably 6 out of 10, maybe even 7 out of 10 of young professionals that walk through the door have student loans. What a lot of the industry and a lot of financial professionals tend to see, or at least tend to feel in those situations, is, hey, another headache, hey, another challenge for us to address. Debt's always a problem. But I get super excited about it because with the proper professional training specific to student loan planning, with a surgical approach to student loans themselves, that's 70% of young professionals I speak to. We have an opportunity to work together. We have an opportunity to change their lives. And from an industry standpoint, or even an occupation standpoint, we see pretty significant student loan balances. Right?
Absolutely.
Some big ones.
And it ranges widely, right? And I think, in just doing some preparation for this conversation outside of the engagements that we've already had, like I know personally that the largest amount of student debt that I've come across in a consultation was $800,000. Okay. Now I've seen everything from like $25,000 all the way up to $800,000. And income earning potential is all over the place in between, right? Because sometimes you have career changers. But you and I were reviewing a recent study, it's about a year old, that was provided by SoFi on average student loan debt based on occupation. And so based on the numbers that we have here, which one was most glaring to you?
I think the one that jumps out as most glaring to me generally, and I think it's just because it's more surprising, is in the dental field. Right?
Yeah.
We always think that traditional doctors or traditional medical practitioners, right, general surgeons, family medicine, that's where the biggest loans often come from. But when we look into the dental field and getting an MD there, An oral surgeon, on average, might take out $500,000 in student loans. An orthodontist may take out $550,000 of student loans just to get all of their postgraduate degrees and everything they need to in order to start practice.
Right.
A general dentist, $300,000 of student loans.
Yeah.
Right.
And in my mind, that's almost low, because when I sit down with a general dentist coming out of residency and getting ready to go into like an associate dentist role, I'm seeing, again, the 300 to 400,000 plus. And it really just depends. It's going to depend on, is it just graduate loans or is it graduate plus undergraduate? And then how expensive was the graduate program, right? And then also understanding that if they are doing a residency, that they're taking out loans to support lifestyle during that period of time as well. Now, there has to be this conversation of return on investment of education based on the loan. So like, we have a list here that jumped out at us. And so we'll run through them really quickly as far as the occupational specialty, the average outstanding student loan balance, and the median salary. And obviously this is going to vary based on geographical location, but let's look at the dentist, right? So average student loan balance was about $304,000 versus the median salary of about $167,000 in that first year. Now, when we think of dentists, especially the ones that own their own practice, they're making more often than not, or have the opportunity to make more than $167,000. And a lot of that's going to be based on production and how many patients they're seeing and taking care of. So at least early on, again, geographical location is going to drive a lot of these variables. But on average, we're seeing about $167,000 in income versus outstanding student loan balance of $304,000. Just general physician, right? On average, about $205,000 in outstanding student loan debt, median salary about $235,000, right? And that's not having any sort of specialty, because you talked about surgeons. So oral surgeon, average outstanding student loan debt is going to be over $500,000. Median salary is about $311,000. Now, it's not just medical students that are getting large student loan balance, right? There are other professionals as well. What do those look like?
So let's think we're still in that medical field, right? Physician's assistants, they don't necessarily have an MD, but their average student loan balance is somewhere around $110,000. And their median salary sits at about $120,000.
Right.
There's higher education outside the medical field. A lawyer, on average, may have about $180,000 for their postgraduate degrees, and their median salary is $127,000. So what we tend to find or tend to see is that if we just look at the numbers in their raw form, there's certainly an argument to be made on this idea of return on investment and leveling up with additional specialties. But the question that I have, and through the experience that you've seen, is like, how do some of these different professionals feel about the balances that they're leaving school with, or the balances that they're now tackling once they enter that median salary as a first year?
Yeah. So I will say the sentiment that I am able to extract from the initial consultation is that my main objective is to pay this debt as quickly as possible, is because that's what everybody's told me to do.
Yep.
Okay. And the reason being is because it provides stress and anxiety. It is an imperfection on their balance sheet. It is this glaring thing on their balance sheet that's just like, hey, I'm married to you. And sometimes I don't even know why I still decided to take this out, but I know that it's my burden. I have others who are like, hey, I already know my game plan is to go into a public service sector opportunity where I'm working for a not-for-profit, where I'm working at a local or state or federal agency level type role, so that I could try to take advantage of federal forgiveness opportunities. Okay, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit also, as what those look like and what could be considered. But the biggest win for these borrowers when we sit down with them is that when we establish a relationship, a working relationship, we're able to provide them with an estimated finish line, right? So as someone who likes to run half marathons, it's much easier in your mind if you know how far away you are from the finish line, because you know how much more you need to dig from the tank to be able to push to either hit your PR, right, your personal record, or to just finish, even if you're just crawling across the finish line. Like having that finish line and that estimation around what's my potential all-in paid, like all out of pocket? How much am I saving? And am I being efficient with this decision, as opposed to, hey, I'm just making a payment. I called my student loan servicer and I asked them to give me the smallest payment possible, but I'm not really making any progress. Well, yeah, you're not, because you're barely even paying all the interest that's due each month, but there's no There's no real strategy or rhyme to the reset. It's not purpose driven. And that's everything that we're trying to promote on this podcast is everything that we do with our finances should be purpose driven. And that's what we coach our clients through.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of the student loan focus is oftentimes in the medical field. Doctors, dentists, PAs, physical therapists, because that's where a lot of higher education costs oftentimes tend to stack really high. But talk to me about MBA holders, people who are pursuing an MBA just to get further specialty or another degree to level up in their career that doesn't necessarily always have that big check that you can expect in year 1 or year 2.
And nothing against MBA holders, right? Like there's usually a rhyme to the reason as to why someone feels like it's important to have an MBA. But MBA holders typically have about $80,000 or more in outstanding debt. And the median salary is about $115,000. So in that scenario, like what you start to recognize is that income is greater than the outstanding debt, which makes it a little bit more difficult from a surgical perspective or a strategic perspective to obtain some sort of forgiveness. Typically, you're going to have to consider paying them back in full. And so then it's a matter of, well, how do we do that in the most efficient way possible without neglecting your desired lifestyle, right? And again, it's understanding the difference between need versus want. But I firmly believe in our mission at Genesis Wealth Planning is to help our clients find that equilibrium between living their best life today while also planning prudently for a successful tomorrow, right? And if it includes balancing in your student loans, then absolutely.
And I think that's a perfect segue into some of the things that any borrower or any debt holder should consider. The first one being just simply, how do we think through opportunity cost and what potential value we can add as professionals and what value clients can find for themselves or they have the opportunity to experience through pursuing what is that purpose-driven path, right? Finding the why, finding what is ultimately a plan that they put forward to say, this is what the finish line looks like. Here's the path to get there. And so I think when Michael and I sit down with a new client in any form or fashion, our biggest encouragement to clients is to really sit down and have a conversation about before, how do we tackle this problem or how do we get rid of this debt? It's more so, how do we think differently about opportunity costs associated with the debt that you have now and things like lifestyle, things like building towards goals and what is essentially working towards becoming that extraordinary wealth builder. So how do you approach that first coaching session of opportunity cost does exist and let's chat about it?
Yeah, and that's a great question because a lot of it is this intersection between what's rational and reasonable. And we've talked about that in the past, and I'm sure it'll continue to come up because I feel like that's a good principle to have in your practice as a financial representative or financial professional. And so I need to better understand, like, how does debt make you feel as an individual? There are some people who just cannot stomach debt. They've been taught their entire life that debt is evil. It's the worst thing. It'll hold you back from finding success, right?
And who are they taught that from? It's from people or individuals who never had the student loan challenge before.
Right.
It's easy for them to say it.
Exactly. It's easy for them to say it. Just think about our parents or grandparents. When they were buying houses were less than $100,000 more often than not, especially our grandparents.
You were working a part-time job paying for your degree,
right?
In most scenarios,
working for a part-time job, and tuition was maybe $3,000 a year.
Yep.
Well, cost of living is higher today, and there's just a lot more challenges financially because of so much expansion and growth that's happened in the economy and just in our financial worlds. So a lot of positives, a lot of negatives. But I need to understand, what is the overall objective and goal with this debt, and are you open to seeing alternative strategies or unconventional approaches that go against the norms of society or everything that's being told by the talking heads in the media, right? Maybe even against what your parents have instilled in you, right?
Yep.
And so one of the first questions that I ask everybody is, if you had the opportunity to pay more in taxes each year, would you?
I think everyone will answer that question, or everyone listening will be like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Of course I don't want to pay more in taxes.
Yeah,
right?
Most people can't stomach paying anything, to the IRS at the end of tax season. No different with these student loans. If there are efficient ways for us to be able to address this to where you're paying what's required, your fair share, and nothing more, you can be relieved of this burden, then why not look at that? Okay? And so let's go through an educational exercise of looking at if and what. How do we look at this from a different angle? And so I want to be able to let them know, like, hey, there's a couple things that I don't want to do and that I'm not going to push on you. One, I'm not going to chase an interest rate because I already told you I don't let the interest rate tail wag the dog. Because for a lot of these individuals or a lot of these professionals, their income is going to have an opportunity to multiply significantly over the course of their career as they become to gain more experience and potentially as they shift from being an associate to a practice owner, maybe owning multiple practices. And that's where you could really see a significant increase in income earning potential. So I treat it as a survive in advance type of mentality early on towards like, hey, let's find some balance. Let's set the stage. Let's look at forgiveness opportunities. What's available to us, right? Well, we know that if they're federal loans, the two primary are going to be time-based forgiveness. That's where you're making an income-driven repayment for 20 or 25 years, depending on if it's undergraduate loans versus graduate versus which of the 5 income-driven repayment plans you're enrolled in. The other option is public service loan forgiveness, most prominently well known. And it's, hey, I'm working for an eligible employer or a qualifying employer in a full-time capacity while enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, making on-time payments each year, working more than 32 hours a week, having qualifying loans that have to be, direct Stafford loans or consolidated direct loans, and I have to accumulate 120 eligible payments. If I do all those things, I am granted tax-free forgiveness.
Let's break that down perhaps a little more simply, right? What I'm hearing there is I work a full-time job like I otherwise would have. I'm in the right loan, whether I chose it strategically or just happened to be there before. I'm in the public sector and I work for 10 years, right? If I do
Correct.
that, the loan gets wiped away.
Correct.
It's that simple.
And when we say the public sector, again, it's got to be state, federal, local agency, or not-for-profit. And so the example we're going to walk through here near the end of our conversation today is really going to set the stage, especially for medical professionals, because there's an opportunity cost at hand coming back to that, right? To where, well, what am I giving up by going into the private sector right out of my training versus sacrificing a little bit in the public service sector initially just to build some more experience and then transition to the private practice sector once my loans have been forgiven?
There, let's circle back to what is time-based, right? If the public student loan forgiveness is pretty simple, 10 years, public sector, on-time payments, working a full-time job. The time-based forgiveness is a little bit more intricate, and maybe not even intricate is the right word, but it's a little more challenging because all of a sudden now I'm hearing things like 20 or 25 years. That seems like a long time.
It does seem like a long time, right? But think about mortgages, right? Mortgages are usually 15 to 30 years, right? So if you can look at the debt in the frame of this is a mortgage, then it's a little less stressful. And so with the time-based, there are some things that you have to prepare for because time-based forgiveness is traditionally treated as taxable income, the amount that's forgiven. So if you have $300,000 in federal loans forgiven after 20 or 25 years worth of an income-driven repayment, that's going to be a pretty sizable tax bill. Someone who's receiving $300,000 in forgiveness, assuming a 35% federal tax rate, that's a tax bill of about $105,000. Like that in itself could be frightening. Now, what we're doing, though, is we're setting up safeguards, regardless if the borrower is going to go through public service loan forgiveness or time-based forgiveness, because what we're trying to do ultimately is let's pay the least amount required. Let's pay our minimum fair share. And then whatever we were planning on paying or whatever we anticipated the payment being, we'll save the delta. We'll save the difference. And we'll start to put that to work for the client in a liquid bucket that they can access in the future if their employment strategy changes, right? Going from the public service sector to private, or, getting a massive pay raise and now we're able to accelerate the payoff and pay it off sooner, right? Which ultimately, diminishes the amount of interest that would have been paid long term. So we're trying to build safeguards in place to be able to protect ourselves and the borrowers in the event that things change legislatively, which they do and they have is very fluidly the last 3 years, or if their life shifts significantly.
So here is where at least my thoughts begin to go to is, right, a client walks through my door, through your door. They've got this big student loan balance. They are a well-earned or high-earning professional. And the first thought that they have is, I need to pay this down and I need to do it as soon as possible. We step in and say, you know what? If there's another opportunity out there for us to really surgically strategize around what we can do here, most clients are going to say, absolutely, let's at least go through that exercise. But I think what most people can really connect to is outside of the numbers or the spreadsheets, what are people giving up by not considering other options? Like, what are some tangible things that you've seen where like, hey, this individual or my client here is giving something up by making these payments or not walking down a purpose-driven path?
Yeah. So the things that come up, and I love these conversations, at least initially, because again, people reach out to me, they'll book an appointment with me, and the first thing is, hey, I got a ton of student loan debt. I need to figure out how to address this. It's usually the main pain point on their balance sheet. And
it's the biggest one oftentimes, whether it's assets, liabilities, otherwise. It's the biggest number on the balance sheet.
It's the glaring imperfection, right? It's like having a perfect diamond, but then you have this massive imperfection on it that just takes away or diminishes at least the presence of it. And we go through that first date, and we're having a conversation around, what do you ultimately want to accomplish within the first 3 to 5, 5 to 7 years, personally, professionally, financially? And of course, eliminate my student debt as quickly as possible is the first one. But then they start talking about, I want to buy my first house. I want to look at investment real estate. I want to get married. I want to start a family. I want to be able to travel freely financially every year. Maybe I need to upgrade my car because while in medical school and residency, I was driving an older vehicle that's less reliable now. And now that I'm making 2, 3, 4 times what I was making while in residency, now I can afford to buy a bigger car. So it's all these different personal goals. And, we obviously can't be matchmakers. So, we have to let them know, hey, this is a great goal. But, unless I come across a client who's single looking, that you might be able to mesh with, or if we're having a client appreciation event, it's going to be really hard to play Cupid. As we ask them in the second phase of that exercise, it's then, well, how do you put these in order from highest priority to lowest priority? And I just love, because it almost happens automatically. It's not 100% bulletproof, because there are some people, again, personality-wise, that just hate debt. But eliminating the student loan debt starts to fall down the totem pole, especially if they feel that there's confidence in designing and providing a different alternative option for how to address it in an optimized and efficient manner, but even more so a purpose-driven manner, because every dollar I decide to give to some sort of debt collector is one less dollar that I get to put towards my current life and my current experiences, but also my future delayed life and my future delayed experiences.
Yep. Oh, I 100% agree, right? When I see clients come in with that big imperfection on their balance sheet and that's their biggest concern, what I know intrinsically is, hey, that person is ready, willing, and they think their only option is to give up things that are important to them. And that's what we want to show, right?
Well,
you don't necessarily have to give up those really important things, or at least the big goals that you have, just because, hey, now I'm stuck with this debt.
It's one of those things where let's try to find that balance, right? And again, the client's going to drive which route we go, regardless of how beautiful of a plan we're able to put together. Because at the end of the day,
they're still driving the car. We're just sitting passenger, right?
Right. Exactly. And so there's that aspect of it, but also it's a matter of understanding that the way that interest accrues on federal student loans is not the same as how interest compounds on investments, from like compounding interest and time value of money. It compounds with investments, or has the opportunity to, a lot more powerfully or a lot more powerful than the way that interest accrues on federal loans, because the interest is based every month, every year, based on the original outstanding principal balance. It's not, based off of the principal balance plus last month's interest that was due, and any remainder now gets added to the principal balance, basically meaning that your interest increases every month. That's not how it works. It's not like credit card debt or anything else like that. So that's often overlooked, not only by the borrowers, but even some financial service professionals.
On our website for this episode, we'll have posted more specific details about all of the different types of repayment plans and when perhaps they may be best to consider. But Michael, let's walk through how you and I might consider maximizing forgiveness as a graduating M4, or for those who aren't in the medical field, a graduating medical student.
Yeah, no, of course. And I love this, right? Because most recently, this cohort of medical students, M4s, just completed their training at their local universities back in late May, early June. So this is front of mind. It's fresh. We're having a lot of consultations right now with clients, which is exciting. But the biggest thing that they should be focused in on is, how can I maximize my either time-based forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness credits, right? And again, It's understanding what are the requirements and steering clear of non-meaningful or non-valuable repayment plans that just do not allocate credits towards either one of those forgiveness opportunities. Even if you think you're going to be able to pay your loans back in full, why not have a contingency plan to be able to accrue payments towards forgiveness opportunities, right? So one of the things that we're trying to control is the borrower's adjusted gross income. Well, most borrowers coming out of medical school were not earning any income or had very minimal income because they were just focused on passing their exams and completing their training and getting good grades, right? So we want to encourage them to consult with their local CPA and tax planning professional and consider filing a federal tax return in the tax season of their final year of medical school. Why? Because when they apply for an income-driven repayment plan, when they start orientation as a PGY1 or a first-year resident, their income-driven repayment plan is going to be based on prior year tax return or most current recent supporting financial document like a pay stub. Okay.
Yep.
Now, if you have an adjusted gross income of 0, then that's going to help you obtain a $0 payment for at least 12 months.
So let's pause there. So for the M4s just graduating now, what you're saying is they need to file taxes this year, or the M3s, the ones before, should be filing taxes last year and this year.
So the latter. So if you can file it each year, that's fine. But as an M4 this year, again, they graduated in May or June. So hopefully they had the opportunity to file a tax return before April 15th, right? Or they had an extension and they're filing it before October 15th of this year. Now, again, it's not the end of the world if you didn't. There are still other ways for us to potentially get you a $0 payment for the first 12 months. Now, the other thing to consider is that when you have an income-driven repayment plan, the way that they calculate the borrower's monthly minimum required payment is they're taking the borrower's adjusted gross income based on family size. Okay, so the more family members you have, the higher the deduction of U.S. poverty line. So it's, hey, adjusted gross income of the household based on family size and tax filing status, married jointly versus married separately. Then we're going to reduce that by the U.S. poverty line, which is adjusted every year. So for 2024, a family size of 1, an individual, the 2024 U.S. federal poverty line deduction is $15,060. Now, depending on which income-driven repayment plan you opt into, that's going to be inflated. So meaning that the U.S. poverty line deduction for a single individual with the Saving on a Valuable Education plan, the SAVE plan, is $33,885. So as long as the borrower's income is below that $33,885, their household discretionary income, or the difference between the two, the adjusted gross income and the U.S. poverty line, is going to be negative or 0. And if it is, then their monthly payment is going to be 0. And that's locked in for 12 months. Okay.
So hold the phone there. But here's the challenge. If I'm not making any payments, how am I going to pay them off sooner? Or how am I ever going to pay them off if I'm paying $0? Where does that come into play?
So this is where what happens with unpaid accrued interest, as well as what's the overall objective. If the overall objective is to seek public service loan forgiveness, again, 120 payments while in an income-driven repayment plan, then the accrual of interest is almost irrelevant because the forgiveness amount is tax-free. So we're not even planning on paying it back. We're just paying the absolute minimum required, right? Going back to, if you had the opportunity to pay more in taxes each year, would you? No, that's bonkers. No. Why would I do that? So with your student loans, if we're seeking public service loan forgiveness, let's not pay more than we have to, right? Let's be strategic about this.
That's important, people. What I heard there was interest is irrelevant depending on the strategy and the plan that you have in place, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so again, looking at this formula, adjusted gross income minus U.S. poverty line deduction, that's going to give the education department the borrower's household discretionary income. This is how much money they think the borrower has laying around, floating around to make payments towards their student loans, okay? They then take that, multiply it by either 10% for graduate loans or 15%, depending on which income-driven repayment you're in, or even 20%, which is the income contingent repayment plan, which most borrowers aren't using today. It's very far and few that borrowers are utilizing that plan. But they then take the 10% of that household discretionary income, that's the annual payment divided by 12, that's your monthly payment. So again, if the individual borrower has income less than $33,885, then their payment's going to be 0. Now think about this. When I graduate as an M4, how many months typically am I working as a PGY1 in that tax year?
6 to 7 months, maybe. Yeah,
Right.
depending on exactly when your graduation date is and how soon you start.
Right. So if I am a PGY1 and the first year incomes are going to vary depending on where I'm at geographically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say the PGY1 base salary is $71,000. If I started orientation in the middle of June, and that's about 6.5 months worth of income, gross income, that comes out to $38,458 to be exact, right? I'm a very technical person, so I have to be as close to accurate as possible, right? That's just my personality. Well, that's my gross income. That doesn't take into account any of the deductions that I'm going to get my income below $33,885. So this is where we start to put on that surgical hat and we say, hey, what are ways that we can reduce your adjusted gross income? Pre-tax deductions to a 403B, IRA, or 401k. Pre-tax contributions to a health savings account or a flexible spending account, depending on what your employer offers and which one's most beneficial to you. If you have children, pre-tax contributions to a dependent care FSA.
Yep.
These are things that we can do to shrink your adjusted gross income, which reduce how much you're required to pay towards your loans. So that's where heading into year 2, when you're required to recertify your income as a borrower to reapply for that income-driven repayment plan, your income, your adjusted gross income should be in range to where it's less than that U.S. poverty line deduction again for a second time, which means we just got another 12 months of non-payments. Yep. So 24 months opportunity of non-payments, all credited towards time-based forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness. And again, each income-driven repayment is going to be a little bit different. There's 4 or 5 plans right now. The Saving on a Valuable Education plan, which is currently in the court system right now. It's being fought over, so we'll talk about that at the end. So continue to stick around, fight through it. Pay as you earn, or known as pay. There's new income-based repayment, which mimics pay, and pay is supposed to be going away soon for borrowers as far as being able to enroll in that one as a new borrower. Income contingent repayment, which we talked about, that's the OG. That was the original income-driven repayment plan. It's the least advantageous for most borrowers. And then old income-based repayment, which, again, not the best, but there's a time and place for when utilizing it. And each of them have different variables as to how they calculate that monthly minimum payment. But today we're primarily looking at the SAVE plan.
Okay. So here's what I'm hearing is so far we've got a plan in place, or at least the first stages of a plan. We're working to drive payments as low as possible, perhaps even zero in those first couple of years. And when those payments go to zero and we surgically put money into the HSA, the pre-tax 401k, the FSA, that's money on those people's balance sheet that now you can use for things that are important. But the big question that kind of jumps out to people next is like, hey, Michael, that sounds great. Hey, Brady, this sounds awesome. But yeah, by the way, when I'm finished my residency, I'm going to be making $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 a year. That whole poverty line thing doesn't really seem like it's going to work anymore. And we're now only 3 or 4 or 5 years in, right? I've still got 15 years where I'm making good money. It looks like or sounds like I might just go pay all my loans at this point. So what do you do then?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. So when we're building out this comparison, we have to be able to say, okay, what if we were going to be most optimal? Well, the most optimal repayment strategy is going to be paying it off in the shortest period of time, which is typically the 10-year standard repayment. It's almost the equivalent of a 10-year mortgage. It's a fixed monthly payment based on the interest rate and the number of payments required to get it from what the balance is to zero. Okay, so let's walk through a living case. 29-year-old, just completed medical school, heading into first year of residency, PGY1, making $71,000 and has around $402,684 in outstanding federal loans. Okay.
Pretty average, right?
Pretty average, right?
Yeah.
3-year residency program, not wanting to do any sort of fellowship. Fellowship would be extra years towards specialty training, right? To become more narrow and deep within a specific area of medicine. Now, for anyone who's doing fellowship, I've had some instances where it's 5, 6, 7 years worth of training between residency and fellowship. And that's a massive opportunity for these borrowers to pay very, very little, under $100,000 over 10 years, because their income will rarely eclipse $100,000, $125,000 while in training. So that's a completely different animal that can be maximized over the course of 120 qualifying payments for public service loan forgiveness, or even time-based forgiveness, which again is 20 years or 25 years, depending on the income-driven repayment plan and the type of loans that you have. Now, going back to this example, again, PGY1, $71,000 gross income, $402,000 in federal loans, 3-year residency. we already have it set up and primed and positioned to where the expectation is that they're going to have the 24 months of non-payments, 0 payments, okay? Now, I know mathematically that if they wanted to pay their loans off in 10 years, 120 payments, that they would have to pay $4,292 a month.
That's pretty much their whole salary at $71,000.
Basically their whole salary. So one, is that even realistic to be doing while in residency? Probably not. But when they get into attending and they're practicing, well, then they can. But even still, $4,300 a month is a pretty large piece of their after-tax take-home income. And again, that's an opportunity lost if we're throwing all that at the loans and we don't have to.
And what what we see often there is that's 10 years of not saving. And I'm sure we'll have discussed on many podcasts, the importance of time in the whole compound interest formula is pretty much the key to success, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm 29, I'm trying to do my best to start saving, but oh, wait a minute, I've got this huge payment that I'm making. I'll wait till 39 to ultimately begin to save competitively. And hey, I've just missed out on 10 years of a career's worth of earnings and compound interest that I'm working towards.
Right. And like to put that into a different lens, $4,300 a month is right around $59,000 a year. So just think about the power of wealth building potential or extraordinary wealth building potential an individual could have if they were able to save a fraction of that, even if it were just 50% over the course of a 10-year period, earning a reasonable after tax and fee return of 6% in the market. Yeah. So again, going back to this, that benchmark, that 10-year fixed payment, that's our benchmark moving forward. Now, we're trying to save as much as we can of that $4,300 and them having to pay 0 for the next 24 months. So whatever we can find through a cash flow analysis while they're in residencies, a PGY1 and PGY2, we're committing to save as much of that as we possibly can in risk-free cash, but also into a earmarked for a later date student loan fund, non-negotiable, to safeguard their strategy, okay? Now, I also know, based on the softwares and analysis that we're able to conduct in their raw data, that the estimated income-driven repayment plans within the SAVE program is going to range from $0 to $1,400 a month over the course of 120 payments. Even still, when they're making $250,000 as an attending, we're still saving them about $2,800 a month in potential payments by being in an income-driven repayment versus being in a standard 10-year repayment. So
what's the opportunity cost there, right? It's your balance isn't amortized or paid down as quickly.
Correct. And that's the argument, right? Well, my balance isn't moving. I'm barely paying the monthly interest that's due. Well, one, go back to something I said earlier. If we're seeking public service loan forgiveness, the interest is irrelevant because it's tax-free forgiveness federally in almost every single state, right? So it's okay. If it's time-based forgiveness, there's the potential that there could be a tax bomb, but we should have a large enough runway for compounding interest to work in your favor to where we can prepare for that potential future tax bill. Yep. And the net opportunity cost has a high probability of still being in your favor as far as net cash flows allocated versus net cash flows accumulated, okay? Now, for this specific borrower, if they decide to pay their loans off in 10 years, they're going to pay close to $453,000 over 10 years.
That's a house, people. That's a full house, right?
That is a full house, okay, over 10 years. If we seek public service loan forgiveness, which is something that they have interest in based on where they see their career taking them, and we're able to maximize how we manage their adjusted gross income with the assistance of their CPA and accountant, they have the potential to only pay $96,000. Okay?
Wow.
So that's your opportunity cost. Do I want to pay $453,000 or would I rather pay $96,000 and receive tax-free forgiveness? Oh, by the way, I was saving aggressively along the way for the past 10 years. In both my retirement bucket, because we're going to recommend that they're maxing out their 403B or 401k pre-tax when they get into their attending phase while they're in residency and fellowship, we're not maxing it out because they need cash flow to enjoy and support their lifestyle, right? But we're making contributions to it to at least max out or maximize their employer match, right? Maybe more if cash flow permits. But the idea here is that we're taking into account all of the cash flows that were saved, how efficient we were with paying down this debt. And so what that affords this individual is the opportunity for $381,000 in tax-free forgiveness after 120 payments, and the opportunity to accumulate almost $200,000 in liquid investable assets that they get to retain on their balance sheet and use for something else 10 years down the road, assuming that they're only saving $1,000 per month and generating a 6% return net of taxes and fees consistently year over year for those 10 years.
That is quite a swing, right, from what ends up on your balance sheet after that 10-year window. What I saw was basically a negative $450,000, or what eventually just wipes your debt to zero, just making those 10 yearly payments, versus what is $200,000 on your balance sheet and all of those extra funds going to lifestyle, going to what's important over that time frame. The swing is huge, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess the question I have for you then is, have you seen or experienced clients who have gone through or finished full forgiveness, and what are those people saying? How do they feel?
So I've had the opportunity to witness a lot of those conversations, and I will say it is one of the most rewarding feelings in the world. One, because there's still some skepticism from the clients at times that, hey, is this really going to work? Like, am I just kicking this can down the road for no reason? And then they get the letter in the mail, or they log into their student loan balance, and it goes from being hundreds of thousands of dollars to zero, right? Like, I was speaking with a family medicine physician yesterday who was a career changer and had over 550,000 in federal loans. And I got introduced to this individual when they were about halfway through public service loan forgiveness, and we added additional tips and strategies to help maximize it further. And they just made their 120th payment last month. And so we've already paused payments, and now it's just a matter of waiting for the education department to get their act in order based on all the changes they've made with public service and forgiveness tracking and everything else like that, to send him his letter and notice that, hey, your loans are going to be forgiven tax-free. And what's even more exciting is that as a household, they're planning out a celebratory trip. This is a huge victory, right? Yep. And we're probably going to help celebrate that with them, right? And then there's this opportunity to recapture the cash flow that was being allocated towards the student loan, so that the bulk of it's going back to saving for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but also being able to enjoy their life now as well, right? Like, we have to get in the mindset of paying ourselves first so that we can be extraordinary wealth builders, but also, why not enjoy the victories that we just accomplished, right?
That's what makes life most fun, at least, or at least most rewarding, is what we see very often with clients is, hey, I get to put another $1,400 on my balance sheet. That's great. But I also get to take the extra trip every year with my kids. Or I don't stay awake late at night stressing about what the heck I'm going to do about this student loan. And that's really impactful for people. And that's what makes us come to work every day. At least that's what makes me come to work every day, is seeing those wins for people.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, going back to that medical student and like the infancy of that strategy, that we have high confidence in what we're putting in front of them, and that what's going to work, and that we've seen with other clients. What I know is going to take place is, because of these other interactions, is that they will have an opportunity sooner than they may have thought to buy their first home, to upgrade their car, to start their family, to get married, to go on the honeymoon that they desire, to have annual vacations and do things along the way without feeling minimized as a minimalist with what they're able to do, because they're just solely focused on eliminating their debt as quickly as possible. Now, we'll have multiple conversations around student loan strategies, because again, you can hopefully tell that I have a lot of conviction and passion around it, and that landscape is continuing to evolve. And I have hundreds and hundreds of stories that I can go through where it's not a one size fits all.
Never.
It's one of those things
instead of a science.
Yeah,
we say it all the time.
It is an art instead of a science. And the professional that you're partnering with is hopefully putting your best interest in mind and doing the research and due diligence, and not just doing what I've seen in the past where it's, hey, let's chase the lowest interest rate and let's refinance your federal loans that offer all these benefits to private loans just because it's a lower interest rate. And now you're stuck with over $600,000, $800,000 in debt as a young professional who is now married to this debt with very little wiggle room on how to reduce your monthly minimum required payment.
Yeah. I think another thing worth pointing out as we kind of wrap up or begin to wrap up our episode is the importance of having a professional, a coach, a guide, someone with proper education and specialized training to help you walk down what is otherwise a path less traveled historically. Is the industry, the landscape, it's all changing on a year-to-year or very consistent basis, right? If there's one thing that we know is with consistency, things will change.
Yep.
So on Thursday, the 18th of July, just this past month, the Eighth Circuit Court actually appealed or blocked all aspects of the SAVE plan. So not a formal ruling yet, but Michael, talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and then how the landscape is now changing for those clients who either have a plan in place or the clients looking to implement a new plan.
Yeah, and I kind of just chuckle at this, and it's because since COVID, student loan planning has become very fluid, and as professionals that specialize in this section of financial planning, we're on our toes. And so like I'm constantly having to remind clients that, hey, let's make decisions and let's plan based on the facts that we have today. We can't make our decisions based on pure speculation alone, right? And so what happened is that this is a second ruling that's happened, and there's been a couple since everything started last fall in 2023, because the state of Missouri and a couple other private lenders were essentially suing the current administration and the education department, thinking based on the idea that the way that the SAVE program was designed was unconstitutional because of the amount of forgiveness that was going to be awarded, right? And so this isn't a podcast talking about politics, so we're not going to choose any side of the aisle. We're just going to present the facts because that's what matters. And so what they're saying is that, hey, the first go around, part of the SAVE plan was blocked, meaning that phase one was, hey, let's get this plan out there. It's got an increased U.S. poverty line deduction compared to the traditional income-driven repayment plans, now at 225% increase of the U.S. poverty line. Also, unpaid interest each month was set to be forgiven through interest subsidies as long as the monthly minimum payment was below the monthly interest that's due. So that's huge. So for anyone who has a payment that was less than the monthly interest that's due, that's a 0% APR loan provided by the federal government. Why would you not take advantage of that, especially if you're seeking public service and forgiveness? The other piece that was blocked was that come July 1st of this year, the second phase of how the monthly minimum payment was being calculated was going to go into effect. So for the first year or so, the monthly minimum payment was based off 10% of the borrower's household discretionary income, right? Didn't matter if they were before. It didn't matter if they were undergraduate loans or graduate loans. Well, come July 1st of 2024, it was supposed to transition to where undergraduate loans payments were based off 5% of the household discretionary income, graduate loans 10%, right? So it would bring the weighted average down some, probably between like 8 and 10% of the household discretionary income. Well, fast forwarded to 2024, and the court said, hey, we believe that there's some things that are being done that might be viewed as unconstitutional. So the court said, hey, you're no longer allowed to use this plan. But the current administration appealed that, and they said, hey, we're still making a decision on this. Essentially, you can continue to implement the plan as is. Fast forward a week or two later, and now the court came back and said, hey, you are no longer allowed to implement the SAVE plan on all facets. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that most borrowers, I want to say it's close to 8 million borrowers, have already been enrolled in the SAVE program. Okay, that's massive.
Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor, and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with.
Very likely that these non-payments will still count towards public service loan forgiveness and time-based forgiveness. Okay,
Sure.
That seems to be the trick pony that the current administration is utilizing when these types of hurdles or barriers pop up for them.
Yep.
So what's going to happen next is that there's likely going to be another appeal, okay, which is going to just continue to prolong this for borrowers. More than likely, new enrollees into the Saving on a Valuable Education Plan are probably going to be paused, meaning that they'll likely have to pick a different income-driven repayment plan for the time being, which isn't the end of the world. So don't get overly emotional or have anxiety around that as a borrower. And they're either going to take this case to the Supreme Court, who will make a decision on it. And then based on the outcomes of that, there will either be a new SAVE plan that will replace the one that was proposed a year ago, or they'll reinstate all of it or portions of it. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's still a lot of unknown. There's still a lot of value being added to the borrowers who are already enrolled in this program. Again, no payments, administrative forbearance, no interest accruing. Very likely it's going to continue to count towards public service loan forgiveness and time-based forgiveness.
Yep. And this is, once again, one of those things that when we hear it, oftentimes can be troublesome. Like, hey, here's a new challenge, here's a change, here's something we have to address. Michael, I think you'd agree with me is I tend to get excited when we see things like this at least come into the forefront of the scene because one, it's getting talked about. Two, it offers us another opportunity to speak with our clients and work with them on an ongoing basis as to, hey, what should we be thinking about? How should we be acting in a logical sense instead of an emotional sense? What type of contingency plans might we be able to develop and how we're going to continue the conversation as new facts come out? Right? It's just an opportunity for us to engage further, which is great.
Absolutely, because financial planning in general isn't like just set it and forget it, and it shouldn't be. And if anyone tells you that it is, I would question that, right? Because life changes on a daily basis, let alone legislation. And that's what we're dealing with right now. It's not necessarily life-changing, it's a legislative change, something that's completely out of our control as consumers and investors or borrowers. So we have to pivot and react to that and understand, well, how is this legislative change going to then affect all the other pieces on the board or all the other pieces to the puzzle from a personal financial standpoint? Because forecasts will change, estimations will change, and that's fine. But this is why we have contingency plans in place with safeguarding the plan, with having a plan B or a plan C, and continuing to review it on an ongoing basis because not only does life change, but also legislation. And so right now, borrowers should be doing the following. They should be consulting with a trusted advisor that has experience and knowledge of how to manage student loan debt and or partnering with a certified student loan professional. Okay.
Yep.
They should also be developing a contingency plan if one wasn't already created to begin with, especially if you're one of those 8 million borrowers that was already enrolled in the safe plan. Start to think about the effects if this plan goes away and what you might have to revert back into. Okay. Because your payments will shift some, not more than likely not drastically or significantly, but still a little bit, right?
Sure.
And then focus on the variables that you can control. Plan based on facts that you have today, knowing that things will change, right? Tax tables change, tax rules change. Depending on, the education department, there are going to be different income-driven repayment plans. There are going to be different forgiveness opportunities in the future. Things will continue to shift and evolve, but you can't get caught up emotionally in what's swirling around you. You have to revert back to the plan and understand what is my purpose and why am I doing the things that I'm doing. And that's where we get to hold true value in the relationships with our clients beyond being able to, illustrate different concepts and strategies and analysis, right? This is more on a personal level, more of a psychological level, more of a behavioral management level. Like, hey, if things are swirling around you and you're frustrated or anxiety, call me. Let's discuss it.
And building that financial fortitude, right?
That's right. Build that financial fortitude, put a moat around your fortress, and just understand that the decisions that you're making, are based on what you ultimately want to achieve personally, professionally, and financially.
Well, I think that about wraps it up. So for those who found this helpful, we hope it was as educational as possible. It gives you guys some insight on how to think differently in what we would consider a newer planning landscape. So please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and be sure to share it with friends, family, and colleagues. For more valuable insights and information on student loans can be found at www.genesiswealthplanning.com/podcast. Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult with your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady Hemmerly are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC. Securities, products, and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC, financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian Consolidated Planning Group, Inc., and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not an affiliate or subsidiary of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974, Brady Hemmerly's California insurance license number 4353077. 6991809, period 1, expiration 926.